well done to you. An incredible story, and I'm sure you got many stories like that, having done this bioelectric medicine. And maybe you want to just define what that is, because it's probably a very new term for people that are listening.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So our kind of comparison is biochemical medicine. So we can think of that as most, top of the heap is pharmaceutical medicine, right? So we use a chemical to affect the chemical electric gradient at the level of the cell, tissue, organ, whatever level we want to talk about. But it's using the a chemical to affect the chemical electric gradient. But you can also put into there functional medicine using supplements, chemicals to affect the chemical electric gradient. You could put in nutrition using, because although all of this has another side to it, but the concept of what, if you look at the literature, you listen to a practitioner, they're thinking about the chemical side. So we talk about food, and it's this nutrient, this micronutrient is, you need more magnesium, you need whatever because that, right? So we're all thinking chemical. So there's been for, well, thousands of years, if we look at Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or Tibetan medicine, there's been a concept of an electrical side. And even in Western medicine, we have hundreds of years of thinking about the electrical side of our chemical electric being. But it's not until relatively recently that we've seen the electrical side start to move forward and come out of the shadows because it got eclipsed by the chemical side. And so there's a way in which we can say, if we want to be reductionist, we're chemical electric beings. Now, I would say we're more than that because I would say we have a soul and all of these other things that can't
Correct.
be reduced to physics. But if we just say chemical electric, so bioelectric medicine is then looking at the electrical side of it and saying, well, what can we bring to bear to shift the electrical gradient at the level of the cell, tissue, organ, organism, whole person, and do that from an electrical understanding, not from a chemical understanding. And so in its simplest form, that's bioelectric medicine.
Okay,
And
brilliant. So with
I'll,
these
I'll,
people, do you take a current, like a transcranial electrical stimulation, and you put a machine or electrodes on there, and then the transmagnetic stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation? Just maybe just explain exactly all these stims and obviously, the research behind them, because now you're putting an electrical or magnetic stimulation on a brain or an
yeah,
organ. What is the research like, and
sure.
how many clinics are doing this, and what is the, double-blinded study saying about this, or the meta-analysis saying about this?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, wow, like that's a big series of questions. I love it. One of my favorite things to talk about. So you talk about meta study. There's a great meta study putting transcranial stimulation um, over against SSRIs, and so something like Alpha Stim, which is a brand, but it's a very simple ear clips, transcranial current. We have a device that does it. There's lots of, you just go out there,
But
they're
let's
all
just
over.
talk about that, because I think that's important. People are going to listen to this, and then I'm like, on your website now, Cerebral Fit, like,
Mhm.
is it something that they can look at here? Which is the one that you do?
Sure.
So Cerebral Brit bioelectric,
Yep.
there's
If
sessions. Yeah.
yeah, on this current conversational thread right now, if somebody wanted to say, okay, what's a device
Mm,
that I could find that does what you're talking about. So
yeah.
the audiovisual entrainment device, so
Yes.
the Delight Pro on our side that does visual entrainment, auditory entrainment, and transcranial stimulation. And that's so right now we're talking about transcranial stimulation.
This is a David Delight Pro.
Correct. The David Delight Pro. Yep. Yep. So great device, best in class for sure. Um, um, so we just talk about the transcranial stimulation. So, um, like what? So, so much to be said. So the meta study was on something like that, a device like that, right? That basically showed a 300% improvement over SSRIs, right?
Wow.
With no side effects, no side effects, versus SSRIs, series of side effects, right? But transcranial stimulation, zero side effects, 300% improvement in outcomes. And that's a meta study, but that has been shown over and over and over and over and over again.
And
And
what's
again,
the usage, guy? Do you have to use it every day, 10 minutes, 5 minutes?
sure,
What is the
yep.
usage?
So yeah, so it's going to, of course, be specific because again, the way we think about it is we don't treat a condition, say like anxiety, because from our perspective, there is no thing called anxiety, right? Anxiety is an experience that we label, right? But where it comes from, there's 1,000 different things that produce this thing called anxiety, right? So from our side, we kind of like to have a little bit of an insight into what's likely the cause of this person's anxiety. And so, because again, what we think we do is we regulate dysregulation in the living system. So we don't treat, a diagnostic code. We regulate dysregulation. So that's always like a little bit of a tension in talking from a diagnostic label or a set of symptoms, and then what do we do for treatment? We don't always know. So sometimes we just need to go with the person says, I have anxiety. Great. What do I do? Here's a general treatment for your general topic. And generally it works. But like everything, if we could be specific, we'll get better outcomes, right? And that's the process I do with people, is try to get as specific as we can, whether that's virtual or if they're in clinic where we can do testing and we say we do a QEG, so we find out. Anyways, so, but just to stay on the what are we doing from a bioelectric standpoint, right? So we're putting in a tiny current, right? So the body runs on microcurrent. Cellular activity, nerve conduction, all of it. We have microcurrent running in our system all day, every day. We run on microcurrent, right? So we're putting in essentially a bioidentical current, and its effect on the brain, there's numerous, but the base one is it normalizes the resting membrane potential of a neuron. So what does that mean? So every neuron has an activation barrier, right? So how much stimulus does it take to cause that neuron to fire? So what we generally say, and this is very loose language, is more metaphor than science, but we need to be able to talk about it simplicity, right? Simply. So we think of anxiety as there's too many neurons that have a low activation barrier, so they fire too easily. So too little stimulus causes a response. And we think of depression as the opposite. The neurons have a higher activation barrier, and so they need more stimulus to get them to fire, right? It's very muddy, analogy, but it does fit. So what we want to do is we want to take the neurons and normalize, bring them back to their endogenous level of need for stimulation to fire. And that's what a transcranial magnetic current does, that across the board. It's a reliable, reproducible, steady effect of transcranial stimulation is we normalize the resting membrane potential. And that just helps a brain as a whole move towards neurotypical in its functioning. And that base change is huge. It takes in so many conditions. Why is transcranial stimulation? You look at the research literature, and again, you asked about research. If you do a Google Scholar search, you're going to find about 3.5 million studies and papers on electrical stimulation. Right? There is no shortage of evidence. Right? Wow. There's massive studies, decades and decades and decades, millions of occurrences of this, very well studied. As we move into some of the somewhat more modern, the number go down. But if, say, we go to photobiomodulation, if we looked at the number of studies, kind of to date for 2023, I've not looked for 2024, but 2023 for photobiomodulation in the brain, we're probably around 20,000. Wow. I mean, that's a lot. and so there's no shortage of evidence, absolutely no shortage of evidence. I sit in on the Boston Mass General Photobiomodulation Grand Rounds, and you've got researchers, clinicians, manufacturers from around the world talking about the latest research. And I mean, every time there's one of these conferences, um, we have an evolution in the update of what we think and what we thought, because there's so much research being done that you meet monthly with the people that are doing the research, doing the clinical application. And it's like everybody's starting from scratch again, because like, oh my God, like we know this now, right? So there's just so much
Amazing.
happening.